What I'd like to do now, on that note, is go to the next stage in this event today. As I said, we're going to be looking at the U.S.-Japan relationship, but much more broadly, also the development of relations throughout Asia and some of the critical issues that Congress will be confronting and is dealing with now. We are so fortunate to have a major leader in the House of Representatives on Asian issues here with us today, Congressman Larsen. And the fact that Congressman Larsen comes from Senator Scoop Jackson's historic district in the state of Washington is, of course, heartwarming from our perspective. As many of you know, NBR was Scoop Jackson's dream. And so this has double meaning for us. But Rick is an incredible leader in the House, developed the working group on U.S.-China relations, has now taken on literally a diplomatic role for the Congress in dealing with leaders in Asia, an extraordinary development. It goes to Asia frequently, and as I said, interacts at the highest levels, has become arguably the House of Representatives' most informed expert on China and Asia more broadly. So it's a great privilege, Rick. Thank you so much for coming. And if I could just ask you to come up and say a few words, and then maybe we can pepper you afterwards with a couple of questions. I'll try to sort those out who would be the most, the nastiest and most aggressive, but I can't guarantee it. Come on up. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Rich. And before I start, to Minister Chiba, if you could pass on my condolences and, of course, my support and the support of the people that I have a great honor to represent in Washington State. Pass it on to Ambassador and his wife as well those same sentiments from my wife. We're very good friends of them, and I know that the devastation in Japan left by the earthquake and the tsunami is extremely tragic. Our thoughts and our prayers continue to be with the people of Japan, and I know the United States will be there to help China, or Japan, as you noted, to be back sooner rather than later. We'll do all we can. Forgive my note about China. I was asked to speak about China today, and this is so I've got to kind of turn on a dime here a little bit. But before I do that, one day they'll say that this district is mine and Scoop Jackson to come from it. One day. Apparently not yet. But one day. But what I wanted to do is to talk about Congress and Asia, focusing on the work that I've been doing over the last several years on China, but also about halfway through this presentation, broaden that scope a little bit to the rest of Asia, and I'll explain why. But I do appreciate the opportunity to discuss this, and I want to note, when I looked at who is attending, I want to be sure I get this first point across. The United States takes no relationship for granted in Asia. Although I'm going to talk about China, we take no relationship for granted. And the reason that I think that the United States and China relationship is the most important one for the U.S. in this coming century is not because it's ripe, not because it's mature, but because we are two big countries with a lot of people and a lot of interests in this region with the least developed relationship. And as a result, we have to try to get this relationship right with China. And that getting it right with China and China getting it right with the United States does have an impact on the other countries in the region. But it is the least developed one that we have. aside from a few we can think of, but and I'll mention later. That's why I've always said that this is the most important relationship in the 21st century, not because it's more important than our treaty relationships, not because we have a relationship with China at the expense of others. It's because it is the least developed one. And with two countries that are so large and so many interests, we have to get this thing right. And I think if you look at the state visit by President Hu in January and then the preceding meetings in December of the JCCT, the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade, you see these were very important because they had to reset the tone of this relationship. Now, heading into the JCCT and the state visit, I communicated to both the U.S. and to Chinese negotiating teams that the Congress needed to see some positive steps in a variety of areas, including economic areas, because Congress does watch this relationship very closely. And Congress is always willing to provide us guidance to any administration. And we usually do, much to the chagrin of most administrations. But if they'd get it right, it wouldn't have to. But in my view, progress was made, and I commend the leaders of both countries for moving the relationship forward. During the JCCT, the U.S. representatives focused on removing barriers to American exports into China. The announcement that China will not link its innovation policies to government procurement preferences, and its commitment to submit a revised offer, yet another revised offer, to the WTO government procurement agreement that will include subcentral, that is local and provincial entities, is a positive sign for the U.S. Is at least a recognition that a lot of the problem that occurs with regard to government procurement occurs outside of Beijing. It occurs in the provincial governments. Additionally, improving IPR protection was a central focus during both the JCCT and the state visit. The U.S. software industry lost an estimated $8 billion in 2010 due to piracy as a result of lack of IPR protection and enforcement in China. Overall, in our economy, that impact could be as high as 60,000 lost jobs in the United States. So clearly, this IPR protection is critical for the innovation of U.S. entrepreneurs. IPR protection, as we have tried to impress upon Chinese leaders over the last 5 years, is also critical for the protection of intellectual property of Chinese entrepreneurs. And so we think everybody wins when they move forward on this. Nevertheless, any new policy announcement in China really depends upon implementation. And we're, as part of the U.S.-China Working Group, tracking these developments closely and working to educate members of Congress on whether these goals are met, including many of the new members. And if I got my days right, today's Wednesday. Is that right? Okay. Tomorrow night, we will do our biannual dinner hosted by the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations out of New York, and we'll have Secretary Albright and General Scowcroft there to meet with new members of Congress. And there are about 30 new members or so of Congress, of the new class, coming to this dinner to sort of possibly for many of them get their initial conversation going on U.S.-China relations. And so the interest of this is pretty high, and looking forward to what our new members have to say, because frankly, it's a blank slate for many of us with a lot of these new members in Congress with regards to the U.S.-China relationship and Asia as a whole. So we're looking forward to that. And the good thing this year is Charles Boustany, Representative Boustany from Louisiana. He's a Republican, and since Republicans have the majority, he has to moderate. So I don't have to moderate this year. So we'll see how it goes. But over the last couple of years, we've worked in the working group to develop a competitiveness agenda, U.S.-China competitiveness agenda, and had 4 key elements. We had 4 bills, one focused on U.S.-China energy cooperation, expanding the diplomatic footprint in China, increasing Chinese language studies by American students, and promoting exports to China from U.S. companies. And although none of these bills passed, there's a lot of ways to get things done in Congress, and these bills actually ended up becoming part of larger legislation. On export promotion to China, the administration rolled out the National Exports Initiative, which provides more funds to the Department of Commerce for more export advocate positions in the U.S. Exports Assistance Centers around the country. And exports to China is a large piece of this initiative and reflects the language of the original bill. The diplomatic footprint: the U.S. mission in China, besides the embassy in Beijing, now includes the following consulates in Chengdu, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Shenyang, and Wuhan, including 5 virtual presence posts as well, which I had listed in my speech but told my staff to take out because my Chinese is not that good. I didn't want to get places all mixed up. But in addition, the administration has requested approval for 10 new presence posts in China and now negotiating reciprocity. On energy cooperation, the U.S. and China signed a memorandum of understanding during the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. I committed both nations to increase dialogue on energy cooperation and directed the establishment of the U.S.-China Joint Clean Energy Research Center. And lastly, on Chinese language promotion, the administration has announced a 100,000 strong U.S. students in China initiative, and the goal is to have 100,000 American students study in China every year over the next 4 years. So, is that right? No. Is that right, Jasper? Total, 100,000 total over the next 4 years. Sorry, I wish it was 100,000 every year. We'll get there. Yeah. I'm sorry. That's my goal. That's what I want to have happen. Yeah. But all these are steps forward in the relationship with China, and I think we're going to find in this set of relationships, it's a matter of a lot of small steps forward, and everyone is sort of looking for the big one-time shot that sort of establishes this relationship forever, and I just don't think that is going to happen with the U.S. and China. I think it's going to be a series of small steps over a long period of time, and we have to be patient in that. Finally, one more word about China and on the security side. In 3 weeks, I'll be traveling to China with Charles Bustani and a few other members of Congress, and we're going to focus a little bit more on the military-to-military relationship. And while I'm happy to see the resumption of the U.S.-China military-to-military relations and participated in the defense consultative talks in December by hosting Undersecretary Flournoy and General Ma at the Capitol, there continues to be some concerning trends in Chinese military development and tactics. The PLA continues to modernize rapidly. According to the Department of Defense, our Department of Defense, its 2010 report to Congress, China's official military budget rose an average of 11.8% annually between 2000 and 2009. And for 2011, it'll be about 12.7% greater than in 2010, according to the Congressional Research Service. So we do welcome China's contributions to international peacekeeping efforts, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and counter-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden. But there are still concerns in the U.S. about its military modernization. Also, there are concerns about its broad claims to disputed territory in the South and East China Sea, causes tension in the region. And while the U.S. and China share a common interest in peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, as well as a denuclearized peninsula, China's response to the sinking of the Cheonan, the November 10 revelation that North Korea had built a sophisticated uranium enrichment facility, and the shelling of the Yellow Sea island of Yangpyeong, China's response to these incidents has been disappointing, in my view, especially since these events contributed further to increasing tension in the region. In the test flight of a J-20 stealth fighter during Defense Secretary Gates' visit to China, it's caused me to question what kind of message China wants to send. In fact, others as well. Is Scott here yet? Scott Swift? He's going to be here a little later.
The command is waiting, and he will be, it's 2:30 or something in the morning there, but he will be on very shortly. Excellent. Maybe he is on. I don't know.
Well, his boss, Admiral Willard, said that China's interest in a peaceful and stable environment that will support the country's developmental goals is difficult to reconcile with their evolving military capabilities that appear designed to challenge U.S. freedom of action in the region or exercise aggression or coercion of its neighbors, including U.S. treaty allies and partners. So there's obviously still some concern about China's military modernization. But with transparency, with dialogue, with cooperation, I think we'll be able to address these issues. But there are real issues that we have yet to reconcile with China. And our allies in the Pacific have similar concerns as well. Just to move on a little bit, for the 112th Congress, I developed 6 separate goals to sort of guide my office. Well, goal 4, my 4th goal is to enhance America's diplomatic and security role in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, why is a member of Congress doing that? I don't know why a member of Congress from Florida would do it. I know why a member of Congress from Washington State would do it, because the Asia-Pacific is our backyard swimming pool. It's not something far away from where I live. And so paying attention to what's going on west of me, I think is important for my state and for the country. And underscored by what President Obama said about a year and a half ago, that he'll be this country's first Pacific president, having a tremendous amount of focus on the Asia-Pacific. And there's reasons for that. The region consumes 50% of the world's energy. The U.S. and the Asia-Pacific account for 60% of the world's gross domestic product. If there's one word to describe America's approach to the Asia-Pacific, it's engagement. As the U.S. continues to work with our friends in the region, we have to understand we must understand that working to establish a trading architecture, a security architecture in the Asia-Pacific is in everyone's interest. It may not be as formal as we've seen in the Atlantic, but still an architecture that is in everyone's interest. U.S. engagement in the region will be comprehensive. It'll be both economic, cultural, security focused. Expanding trade opportunities should be a part of a forward-thinking plan for the United States in this region for our own long-term economic growth that works for us and helps to maintain U.S. economic leadership in the world. The U.S. relationships in the Asia-Pacific will consume much of our attention over the next several decades. And to lay out a few things, I think the first thing the administration has to do is send to Congress, and Congress should pass the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. This will create jobs in the U.S., will serve as a critical piece of the U.S. continued commitment to the region. Second, the U.S. should remain focused on moving the Trans-Pacific Partnership forward. This is a 21st century trade agreement that the U.S. and 8 other countries continue to negotiate. In fact, my recent trip to New Zealand and Australia was focused on the both advancing the TPP as well as making very clear to our trading partners concerns that members of Congress have about key elements of the TPP. We can be downers sometime in Congress. But the current TPP partners have a combined economy of about $1.7 trillion, according to CSIS. So there's a clear, we're a lot of that, but other than the U.S., I guess it's 1.7. So there's a lot to be discussed and a lot to be had out there in terms of good reciprocal trading relationships. Exploring preferential access to these economies could deliver significant gains to the United States, and that's really why we're in this. Why we've pushed the U.S. Trade Representative's office to be part of the TPP. I don't know. Okay, nothing to worry about. Just my BlackBerry going off. A second element, or third element here, is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. It's an important organization for the U.S. to continue to make a priority. This year's APEC summit will be in the United States, in Hawaii. Yes, Hawaii is a state in the United States. And the U.S. must put time, energy, and resources into pursuing the APEC goal of an economically integrated community that provides a more secure economic environment. And that ought to be the focus of our APEC relationship. ASEAN is also critically important to U.S. interests. And I agree with Secretary Clinton that the U.S. views ASEAN as a fulcrum of the region's emerging regional architecture. The U.S. will do more than just engage the region economically. The U.S. will remain committed to the region's security architecture as well. We have many security interests in the United States as we see it. 3 of the world's largest armed forces are in this region: China, North Korea, South Korea. Russia is nearby. China is a nuclear power. North Korea has tested nuclear weapons. Japan is upgrading its defense forces. Terrorist and insurgent attacks often occur in Southeast Asia. flashpoints exist along Taiwan Strait and the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. security interests and the commitment to the region are real, and these interests and our commitment will not go away. The U.S. currently has, and you may hear more from this from Scott, but shouldn't be so informal. Scott spent some time in Everett at the strike group there. So Scott, Admiral Swift. Currently, the U.S. has as many as 100,000 military personnel forward deployed in the Pacific Command, and of course, we have strong alliance relationships with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Australia, plus close security relations with Singapore and Taiwan, many others. And concurrently, the U.S. continues to build on some collaborative missile defense shield in the region that should continue to seek. Would be a way to continue to seek regional cooperation on missile defense in order to decrease the threat of a missile attack. I'll just skip ahead to a few last points here in saying this. In my view, the success of this century for the United States, from the United States perspective, in my view, and I'm a member of Congress, so I don't speak to the administration, so I'm making my point here. In my view, the success of the U.S. in this century will be determined on how our country handles its relationships in the Asia-Pacific region. That might run counter to what a lot of people think who are interested in other areas of the world, and they're free to think that. My view is that the success of the United States in this century will be determined by how we handle these relationships in the Asia-Pacific region. It starts with China, but it does not end there, because the U.S. remains committed to our strong treaty allies and to our partners in the region. The U.S. has economic and security interests with China, and we'll continue to push forward on them, but we have economic and security interests with many countries in that region, and we'll continue to push forward on them as well. As the Asia-Pacific regional architecture continues to grow, the U.S. will, if I have anything to do about it, remain committed to the region as well and being part of that architecture. The U.S. is a Pacific country and has responsibility to engage in the region any way it can. So with that, I want to thank you for being here today and look forward to a successful conference at MBR. And it's good to see Rich and Roy and the folks here at MBR. Thanks a lot.
Questions? Yeah, let's start with Ellen Frost over here, and then we'll work this way.
Thank you, Congressman Larsen. You mentioned congressional concerns with certain provisions. I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Yeah, Ellen,
it's Ellen Frost from the Peterson Institute for International Economics and the National Defense University.
She's setting a good standard for you all, introducing yourselves.
You mentioned a congressional concern with certain provisions of the TPP. I wonder if you'd elaborate and give us some examples. Thank you.
First off, there continues to be in agriculture the issue of dairy that a lot of members of Congress will have concerns about. U.S. dairy industry is concerned about opening up the U.S. market to New Zealand dairy because of, for a variety of reasons. That's one. There's intellectual property concerns. Again, with regards to some of the issues, some of the IP issues that New Zealand seems to be moving forward on that might be detrimental to U.S. intellectual property interests. Those are two that immediately come to mind, and we had discussions with in New Zealand and in Australia. But this is it's a negotiation, and I'm confident that we'll be able to help the administration move forward on this. I think if there's a theme that came out, a broader theme that came out from the conversations we had in New Zealand and Australia, is that no one expects well, this is my assessment, no one expects a full agreement with every I dotted and every T crossed by November of this year in Hawaii. But there's an expectation that there will be a good, not just a good step, a big step forward on the negotiations. So I think that would sort of sum up those concerns.
Bernard Gordon. You'll have a microphone just a second here. And we're going to move this direction. Mike and somebody over here, I think.
Congressman, thank you very much for attending and giving us your remarks. I want to follow where Ellen just
Could you
began.
introduce yourself?
Bernard Gordon, University of New Hampshire. Ellen spoke and asked about a specific issue on the TPP. Just weeks before the disasters in Japan, a group of us were at CSIS and we heard former Foreign Minister Miyahara and others speak pretty in a forward-looking manner about the TPP and a possible Japan role. Now that we have a major commitment to seeing Japan back in Asia, as the minister said a few moments ago, is there any thought of seriously enlisting a Japanese participation in the TPP?
I certainly don't want to come across as cold at all. But the disaster in Japan should stand alone, and we're going to help Japan recover from that. But your question seems to imply that that should be a reason to just bring Japan in. Is that what I gather from your question?
No.
So could you re-ask it?
Okay. The potential for a Japan role in TPP preceded the
Right.
March disasters.
Right.
And it was a very encouraging development, although all of us know of the problems with Japan's agriculture and all the resistances that are likely to come up in that regard. But let me be very frank. A year ago, I wrote a piece
Good.
in the Wall Street Journal that said the TPP doesn't count for much, and Ambassador Kirk's people were very critical of me for
Microphone right
saying that because Japan was not part of it, the TPP wasn't a particularly significant development. Now, since the autumn, since Miyahara and Khan's statements about Japan's interest in the TPP, it began, it seems to me and some others, to elevate in a potential realistic manner. So
Well,
it's
let me say this generally, that this would be a great question for Ambassador Kirk, so I'm going to say that. He's going to be here later, is that right?
He is.
So I'm going to say that, so Jasper will be getting to Ambassador Kirk's office and telling him right now what I'm about to say, so he's not surprised by it. My view is that if there are countries who want to become part of the TPP negotiations, I'm in. What I've challenged people to define for me what a 21st century agreement means, and that is in my speech. It's sort of a throwaway. I'd say that's a throwaway line. Tell me what it means. In my view, what it means is that this agreement is going to start with higher standards, and that if you want to come in later, you've got to come up to those standards. So your incentive is to get in early on negotiation, but also understanding that we're not that the pressure will be to negotiate to a higher standard on issues, not to the lower standard.
Right.
And if any country can deal with its own domestic politics in order to come in with that mindset, that's great. And if they can't, then they need to get their domestic politics settled before they try to come in.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, I think let's go over here to Mike Gadba, I think was next, and then we'll go jump back, and then then we're going to get over here.
Congressman, I welcome very much your statements.
Introduce yourself,
I'm
Mike.
Michael Gadbaugh with Georgetown Law School, a longtime supporter of the U.S.-China relationship and China's membership in the WTO. You mentioned the China's commitment at the JCCT not to link its procurement policy to its innovation policy, which I think is a very important contribution. But at the same time, China is taking the view that its state-owned enterprises, no matter how much control the state may exercise over them, are not covered by their government procurement obligations and not government entities, and therefore they're free to discriminate in any way they choose against foreign products or foreign technologies. My question is, do you see this issue as a challenge for the two countries, given how important this principle of non-discrimination is, and given how important state-owned enterprises have become both in the Chinese market as well as in foreign markets?
Yes.
Good, because we can get more questions in. That's thanks a lot.
Thank you for your direct question.
Here and then there, right there.
Hi, Jim Fothery with U.S.-Japan Business Council. I appreciate and agree with your assessment of the question regarding Japan's possible entry into TPP. I think, that's the message that they've been hearing prior to the disaster, and I think they need to understand that going forward. Just as a small aside, you mentioned the domestic politics and the ability or the need for every country to have to deal with their domestic politics.
That includes the U.S.
I was just going to ask, with regard to our dairy industry in New Zealand, I mean, that's the most frightening prospect of all, is that we couldn't do TPP because New Zealand is a big threat to our dairy industry. So how do we reconcile that on the U.S. side? Thank you.
Well, first off, I would not downplay the concerns that U.S. dairy has just because it's New Zealand. It's only 4 million people. But that doesn't mean they don't have a very efficient dairy industry, and there are serious concerns in the U.S. dairy industry about that. So let's try not to downplay that. But my point I also made is that this is a negotiation, and I think we here in the U.S. have some work to do with the U.S. dairy industry about their position, which currently is they're all for TPP except for dairy. That is literally their position right now. And that is not going to be, honestly, it won't be a position that works if the United States is going to be serious, and we already are serious, but continue to be serious about TPP negotiations.
We have a total of 3 minutes before we're going to do a transition to our discussion with the Pacific Command. Question over here, sure. On this side.
I'll try to be brief. Sean Tandon, I'm a reporter with AFP. You mentioned that you're going to China in a few weeks, and that you want to address the military relationship. I wanted to see if you could expand a little bit about that. What you could do as a member of Congress to try to improve that relationship.
There's a couple things. First off, to just put this in some context, we hosted. Charles Bustani and I hosted General Ma at Capitol Hill last December. It's part of the DCT talks, and had dinner in the speaker's dining room, gave him a tour of the Capitol, brought him to the floor of the House, took him to the Statuary Hall, got a picture with him with the General Eisenhower statue, two generals together. That's what we told him. It's just to just sort of do two things. Try to explain to him. First off, there is an executive side and there's a legislative side. We have three branches of government. Some people say there are four. The House and the Senate. They're misreading the Constitution. There are only three. There have always been three. There will always be three. There are three branches of government, and so for him to come to Congress and do something with Congress was special, because we have a separate role in this relationship. That's obviously one thing we're trying to impress upon the Chinese all the time. Second is that we try to impress upon him the concerns over dinner, or the concerns that we have in Congress. Now, some of us have those concerns on a variety of issues with the PLA's modernization and other issues on the national security front. So we try to take dinner to sort of put all those together and say, here's what you're going to hear, and here's the pressure our administration is getting from Congress. So you understand that if you want this relationship to move forward in any way, these are some things that will have to be addressed. He invited us, if we were to come to China, he invited us to visit some of the facilities. So I don't know that we're trying right now to visit Qingdao submarine base. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that. I visited the civilian space launch facility in Inner Mongolia, autonomous region, a few years back in January. It's very cold in the Gobi Desert in January. I've been to their astronaut training facility as well. I've been to a few other military sites, so it's not unusual to be invited or to go. We're doing that as a matter of trying to impress upon them the importance of transparency with their modernization, the importance of communication with the U.S. military, because it should not come as a surprise the U.S. would like to have a stronger military-to-military relationship, if for no other reason than for communication purposes. And the reason I say that is because the PLA has plenty of military-to-military relationships with plenty of militaries around the world. And yet the U.S. we have a difficult time breaking through. So it's not like they're not used to doing this kind of thing. So we want to impress upon them the importance of this. It helps ease the relationship when there are challenges to it.
Listen, thank you so much, Rick, and I want to maybe close this off and give a little transition here. You made a reference to the fact that Admiral Swift and you know each other, I think, from some interaction. Was it Bangor, or wherever you guys were?
Everett.
In Everett.
Bangor, that's not my district. That's Dick's district.
Even Washington, D.C. Yeah, okay. Is this Admiral Swift? Are you there?
I am, thank you.
That's frightening. He's been here for some time, and we don't know how long.
Hi, Scott. It's Rick Larsen.
Yes, sir. Good to hear you again.
Good to hear you.
Well, thank you so much, Admiral Swift, for joining us. And, just one last comment about that last question that was asked. Congress has had an extraordinary role to play in U.S.-China relations for over a generation, whether it was through normalization, the Taiwan Relations Act, then through annual consideration of most favored nation status. I want to say as a consequence of Larsen-Vanik, but I think it was actually
Jackson-Vanik. I think so, yeah.
But I'm going to get that straight. You really made an impression on me, Rick. So, in any case, so it's had an extraordinary role in U.S.-China relations and will in the future, undoubtedly. And it's not just because the Congress is mentioned first in the Constitution, which it is, as the most democratic and leading part of government, but it's had an extraordinary role in U.S.-China relations. Okay, well, I want to turn this over. Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you.
And